Day 53. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. This week, FBI agents returned to the quiet streets of Catalina Foothills, but they were not searching for Nancy. They were knocking on doors, asking neighbors questions no one had heard before, questions about a vacant house that emptied out shortly before Nancy vanished, and about the names of every single contractor and construction worker who had been near her home in the weeks leading up to the night she disappeared. For 8 weeks, this case has lived inside a single frame, that grainy doorbell camera image of a masked man standing on an elderly woman's porch in the dead of night. But the questions the FBI is asking now suggest that the frame is far too small for what actually happened here. Because this is no longer a story about one masked figure on one night. The investigation has shifted, and the evidence is beginning to outline something far more deliberate, something that may have started not on January 31st, but weeks earlier, with a visit no one noticed and a pattern no one recognized until it was too late. At the center of it all is a gap. 41 minutes between the moment Nancy's doorbell camera went dark and the moment her pacemaker stopped sending signals to her phone. And within those 41 minutes, there is a narrower window, 14 minutes, that the FBI believes may hold the key to understanding everything. How many people were involved, how they moved through the house, and how they took an 84-year-old woman who could barely walk 50 yards on her own. That is what this video is about. Not just what happened to Nancy Guthrie, but what those 14 minutes reveal about the people who planned this and the weeks of preparation that may have preceded it. If you have been following this case, subscribe to Cold Case Files USA, because this investigation is moving, and when it breaks, you will hear it here first. But before we go deeper into the new questions, we need to understand the night itself, because every new lead circles back to those dark hours between January 31st and February 1st. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old, the mother of NBC Today show co-anchor Savannah Guthrie, and she has lived in her home in the Catalina Foothills outside Tucson, Arizona, for decades. She lives alone. She has limited mobility, relies on daily medication, and wears a pacemaker that syncs data to her iPhone. On the evening of January 31st, 2026, her family dropped her off at home after dinner at approximately 9:30. That was the last time anyone in her family saw her. The following morning, a Sunday, Nancy did not appear for her regular virtual church service. A friend called the family. By noon, they were at her house. Her phone was there. Her wallet was there. Her medication, the medication she needs every day to stay alive, was sitting where she left it. Nancy was not. Deputies arrived at 12:15 in the afternoon and immediately recognized the scene as something far worse than a missing person. There was blood, drops of it on the front porch, and traces inside the home. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos said publicly that he believed she had been taken against her will, possibly in the middle of the night, and that she did not leave that house voluntarily. The FBI joined within days. On February 10th, they released doorbell camera footage showing a masked individual on Nancy's porch on the night she disappeared, a man in a ski mask, gloves, a holstered handgun, and a 25-liter Ozark Trail backpack. He was caught on camera covering the lens with vegetation. The FBI described him as roughly 5'9" to 5'10", with an average build. His identity remains unknown. Multiple alleged ransom notes demanding millions in Bitcoin were sent to news outlets. None have been verified as authentic. No proof of life has been provided despite the family's repeated pleas. The Guthrie family has been fully cleared as suspects. A $1 million reward has been posted. 8 weeks later, no arrest has been made. No suspect has been publicly named, and Nancy Guthrie has not been found. That is what the world knows. But beneath that surface, beneath the basic facts that every news outlet has reported, there is a forensic timeline that the FBI has been quietly pulling apart layer by layer. And the first layer begins at 1:47 in the morning. At 1:47 on the morning of February 1st, the Nest doorbell camera mounted at Nancy Guthrie's front door stopped transmitting. It did not malfunction on its own. The footage the FBI later recovered shows a gloved hand reaching toward the lens. And, in one clip, the masked figure is seen holding a flashlight clenched between his teeth, while pressing vegetation over the camera to block its view. That deliberate act, disabling the camera rather than simply avoiding it, tells investigators something important about the person who did it. He knew the camera was there. He knew where it was mounted, and he had a plan for it. For the next 25 minutes, there is silence. No camera footage, no motion alerts, no digital trace of what was happening inside or outside that house. Then, at 2:12, the home surveillance software registered motion. The system did not capture video, only a trigger, an alert that something had moved within range of one of the cameras pointed at the exterior of the property. Sheriff Nanos later acknowledged that the source of that motion could have been a person, or it could have been an animal passing through the yard in the middle of the night. There is no way to confirm which, and that ambiguity matters enormously, because what happens 16 minutes later changes the meaning of that 2:12 alert entirely. At 2:28, Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker application recorded its final sync with her iPhone. The device that had been monitoring her heart rhythm, transmitting data wirelessly to the phone sitting somewhere inside her house, went silent. It did not reconnect. The phone was later found inside the home, but Nancy was not. Those three timestamps, 1:47, 2:12, and 2:28, form the digital skeleton of the night Nancy disappeared. 41 minutes from the first event to the last. And within those 41 minutes, there is a narrower window that investigators have been quietly focused on. The 14 minutes between 2:12 and 2:28, between the motion detection and the pacemaker's final signal. Consider what those 14 minutes might mean. If the motion at 2:12 was the masked suspect leaving the house after completing whatever he came to do, then Nancy's pacemaker continued communicating with her phone for another 14 minutes after he was already gone. That would mean Nancy was still inside her home, still within Bluetooth range of her device, for 14 minutes with no captor present. What happened during those minutes? Did she try to call for help? Did someone else arrive? Or was she already unable to move? But there is another possibility that reshapes the timeline completely. If the motion at 2:12 was not the suspect leaving but someone else arriving, a second individual approaching from outside while the first was still inside with Nancy, then the 14-minute gap does not represent Nancy alone at all. It represents the final phase of a coordinated extraction. Former homicide detective Ted Williams reviewed the timeline and noted publicly that spending 41 minutes inside a victim's home is deeply unusual for a standard burglary or abduction. Most intruders want to be in and out as quickly as possible, minimizing their exposure to discovery. 41 minutes suggests a level of comfort inside that home that an ordinary stranger would not have. Williams stated that the duration leads him to believe the individuals involved were well aware of the cameras and the security system, and that they knew law enforcement would not be arriving imminently. They had time, and they used it. 8 minutes after the pacemaker fell silent, at approximately 2:36 in the morning, a Ring doorbell camera belonging to a resident roughly 2.5 miles from Nancy's home captured a vehicle driving through the area. Fox News obtained and published the footage, though investigators have not confirmed whether the vehicle is connected to the case, but the timing is difficult to dismiss. 8 minutes is enough time to load an 84-year-old woman into a vehicle, pull out of a quiet residential street, and reach a road 2.5 miles away. The FBI also recovered additional images from motion-activated cameras positioned around Nancy's pool, backyard, and side yard. These cameras captured thumbnail images, not video, triggered by motion in the days and weeks before the abduction. According to sources who spoke with ABC News, nothing suspicious was recorded on the night Nancy disappeared. But investigators were able to observe several unidentified individuals in the back and side yards over an unspecified period before that night. Who those individuals were, and what they were doing near the home of a woman who lived alone, has not been publicly explained. The digital timeline tells one story. 3 timestamps, 41 minutes, a gap of silence. But there is a physical detail at that house, something you can see from the street if you know where to look, that cracks the entire single suspect theory wide open. Nancy Guthrie's front door has a security gate. Not a screen door, not a decorative frame, but a heavy metal security gate, the kind common in the Southwest, designed to withstand force and prevent unauthorized entry. Her neighbor Laura, who has a nearly identical gate at her own home, explained to News Nation correspondent Brian Enton exactly what that gate means for this investigation. If that gate was locked on the night of January 31st, and there is no evidence that it was forced open or damaged, then the masked man captured on the doorbell camera could not have entered through the front door. Laura was unequivocal about this. "You are not getting into that gate from the outside," she said. "You are never going to break into that security gate." So investigators are now confronting a question that changes the geometry of this entire case. If the suspect on camera could not get in through the front door, How did Nancy Guthrie get out through it? Laura believes she knows. She told Enton that when she watches the doorbell footage closely, the masked figure does not appear to be trying to force his way inside. He appears to be waiting. He is looking through the door, she said, trying to see what is happening on the other side. She described him as standing at the threshold, peering in, as though expecting someone to open it from within. I think he was standing there waiting for someone to come out, Laura said, and that leads her to a conclusion that multiple law enforcement experts have echoed in the weeks since. Laura believes there were at least 2 people involved, possibly 3. One or more entered through another access point, a back door, a window, some other way into the house, while the man on camera waited at the front for them to bring Nancy to him. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has acknowledged that they are not ruling out the possibility that more than one person was involved. Retired combat veteran and security consultant Kurt Dabb reviewed the available evidence and told reporters he believes there may have been 2 to 4 accomplices, based on the logistics alone. The complexity of this operation, disabling cameras, entering a secured home, removing a woman with limited mobility, doing it all within a 41-minute window without triggering a single neighbor's attention, is simply too much for one person to manage, Dabb said. And then there is the vacant house. Retired Pima County SWAT Commander Bob Kriegier told Parade that FBI agents are investigating a nearby property that was vacated shortly before Nancy's disappearance. Kriegier said the empty home could have served as a staging location where suspects blended into the neighborhood, observed routines, monitored comings and goings, and prepared without drawing suspicion. A vacant property in a quiet residential area provides something invaluable to someone planning a crime. It provides a reason to be there without being questioned. If you are carrying tools near a construction site, no one asks why. If you are walking near an empty house, no one wonders what you are doing. You become invisible in plain sight. The FBI, according to News Nation's Brian Enton, has been back in the neighborhood asking residents specifically for the names of contractors and workers who were active on nearby construction projects in the days and weeks before Nancy vanished. Not general questions, specific ones. They want names. That level of specificity suggests investigators are not casting a wide net anymore. They are tightening it around people who had legitimate access to that neighborhood, people who could have been there repeatedly without anyone thinking twice. If you are watching this and this case is keeping you up at night the way it should, take a moment to hit like, because it pushes this video to more people, and this case needs every set of eyes it can get. The doorbell footage showed the world one masked figure on one night, but the security gate, the vacant house, the construction workers, the 41 minutes of familiarity inside that home, all of it points in the same direction. This was not one person acting on impulse. This was coordinated. And if it was coordinated, it was planned. The question is no longer just who. The question is, how long before January 31st did this begin? And the answer may be hiding in a date that, until this week, almost no one was paying attention to. A night 20 days earlier when something happened at Nancy Guthrie's home that the FBI is only now beginning to understand. 20 days before Nancy Guthrie was taken from her home, something happened at that same house on the night of January 11th, something that went unnoticed by the public, unreported by the media, and unmentioned by investigators for nearly 7 full weeks of the search. It was the Guthrie family themselves who finally drew attention to it. In a statement released on March 21st, Nancy's children urged the Tucson community to search their memories around 3 specific time frames: January 31st, the early morning hours of February 1st, and the late evening of January 11th. That last date stood apart from the others because it had never been part of the public narrative of this case, and its sudden inclusion raised an immediate question. What does a night 20 days before the abduction have to do with finding Nancy? Sheriff Nanos confirmed the significance of the date in an interview with KOLD on March 23rd. "We do believe that something occurred on January 11th, he said, adding that the conclusion was based on the FBI's analysis of digital equipment and data recovered from the home. He would not say what that something was. He would not describe what investigators found. He offered only the admission that the date matters and that it remains, in his words, speculative but supported by forensic analysis." Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer connected the dots more directly. After reviewing the family's statement, she wrote publicly that the language points to the masked individual captured on the doorbell camera, having made a trial run on January 11th, visiting Nancy's property weeks before returning to carry out the abduction. This interpretation gained weight when Fox News reported, citing a source familiar with the case, that 2 of the doorbell camera images released by the FBI were actually captured on different days, meaning the masked figure was photographed at Nancy's home on more than one occasion. And there is one more detail, small on its own but unsettling in context. A neighbor who spoke with television host Nancy Grace revealed that on both the night of January 11th and the night of January 31st, his dogs woke him in the middle of the night with unusual, persistent barking, the kind of agitated alert that comes from sensing something unfamiliar outside. He said this had not happened before those nights and has not happened since. The FBI has also been asking residents about January 24th, though no public explanation has been offered for why that date is of interest. If the pattern holds, it suggests a sequence: January 11th, January 24th, January 31st. 3 dates spread across 20 days, each potentially representing a visit to the property, a step closer to the night it all happened. But the reconnaissance theory, as compelling as the evidence makes it, does not exist in isolation. It sits alongside another thread of this investigation that runs in an entirely different direction and refuses to be reconciled with it. Within days of Nancy's disappearance, multiple news outlets received alleged ransom notes demanding payment in Bitcoin for her safe return. The first note arrived at TMZ and 2 Tucson television stations on February 1st and 2nd. It demanded millions of dollars, provided a real Bitcoin wallet address, and set 2 deadlines: 5 in the afternoon on February 5th and February 9th, with escalating consequences threatened for non-compliance. What made investigators take the note seriously was not the demand itself, but what it contained. According to law enforcement officials and journalists who reviewed the messages, the first ransom note included specific details about Nancy's Apple Watch and about a floodlight at her home, details that authorities had not released to the public at that time. Whoever wrote that note either had direct knowledge of the crime scene or had access to someone who did. The Guthrie family responded publicly. In an emotional video posted to social media, Savannah and her siblings said they had received the message and that they understood. "We beg you now to return our mother to us," Savannah said. "This is very valuable to us, and we will pay." But the deadlines came and went. February 5th passed. February 9th passed. No follow-through. No proof of life despite the family's explicit request for it. No direct communication with the family at all. Additional messages were sent to TMZ in the following days, including one from an individual claiming not to be the kidnapper, but to have information about the kidnapper's identity, demanding 1 Bitcoin, roughly $65,000 at the time, in exchange for a name. The FBI did not deposit money into any of the associated accounts. Journalists who reviewed all the messages noted that the writing style across the various notes sounded like exactly the same person, and that the language contained phrasing, suggesting familiarity with the Tucson area. Yet, a retired FBI agent who analyzed the first note pointed to the use of the term USD for dollars, a convention he said an American would be unlikely to use, suggesting the author might be from overseas, or that the entire correspondence might be a hoax. The ransom thread and the reconnaissance thread pull in opposite directions. A carefully planned, multi-week surveillance operation targeting a specific home suggests perpetrators who are methodical, patient, and locally embedded. Ransom notes sent to tabloid media outlets with shifting demands and no follow-through suggest something far less organized, possibly opportunistic, possibly fraudulent. Construction workers and vacant houses point to someone with physical access to the neighborhood. Bitcoin wallets and letters to TMZ point to someone operating from a distance. Each piece of evidence illuminates something, but together they do not form a single coherent picture. They form competing pictures, and the FBI has not indicated publicly which one they believe is closer to the truth. The clearest path to resolving that contradiction sat inside a laboratory somewhere outside Arizona, a sample of DNA recovered from Nancy Guthrie's home that did not belong to her and did not match anyone known to have been in regular contact with her. Sheriff Nanos described it as mixed DNA, meaning genetic material from more than one individual was present in the same sample, tangled together in a way that makes isolation and identification significantly more difficult. "We have some DNA that we think is still workable," Nanos told reporters in March. "And we have some labs around this country who are really working diligently to get there with this." He confirmed that investigators intended to pursue investigative genetic genealogy, the same technique that cracked the Golden State Killer case years earlier, a painstaking process of matching genetic markers against genealogical databases to build a family tree that leads to a name. But that process takes time, sometimes weeks, sometimes months, and there are no guarantees with mixed samples. While the DNA sat in a lab, other leads surfaced and collapsed just as quickly. Investigators collected 16 pairs of gloves from the area surrounding Nancy's home in the days after her disappearance. One pair, black gloves found along a roadside about 2 miles from the house, appeared to match the type worn by the suspect in the doorbell footage. They were sent to a lab, entered into the FBI's national DNA database, and eventually traced to a local restaurant worker who, according to the sheriff, has nothing to do with this investigation. 16 gloves collected, and the one that looked most promising led to a dead end. A man named Carlos Palazuelos was detained during a traffic stop in Rio Rico, roughly 60 miles south of Tucson, near the Mexican border. On the same day, the FBI released the suspect images. His home was searched. Hours later, he was released. He told reporters standing outside his damaged front door that he had no idea who Nancy Guthrie was. Mexican authorities in the state of Sonora confirmed that the FBI had informed them there were no leads, suggesting Nancy had been taken across the border. The investigation has not produced a single publicly identified suspect. No one has been arrested, no one has been charged. And yet, behind the scenes, former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer insists the case is anything but stagnant. She wrote that the investigation is red hot in every category, and that the FBI is processing more leads than most cases ever generate. If that is true, then the silence from law enforcement is a choice, not a reflection of failure, and it is a choice that has begun to generate its own kind of tension. Coffindaffer herself questioned what she called the cloak and dagger approach, writing publicly that if the FBI and local law enforcement want the public's help, the level of secrecy makes no sense. Sheriff Nanos has said in interviews that he believes investigators know why Nancy's home was targeted, that the abduction was not random, that it was directed at her specifically. But he has withheld the details, citing the integrity of the ongoing investigation. In nearly the same breath, he warned Tucson residents not to let their guard down. "Do not think for a minute that because it happened to the Guthrie family, you are safe," he said. "Keep your wits about you." He is telling the public that the crime was targeted while simultaneously telling them the perpetrator could strike again. He is saying investigators understand the motive while refusing to share what that motive is. And he is asking the community to come forward with information while his department and the FBI keep their own findings locked behind closed doors. The frustration has grown sharp enough that Nanos now faces a recall effort from members of his own county. Residents who feel the pace and transparency of the investigation have fallen short of what this case demands. Meanwhile, the last known video of Nancy Guthrie alive, footage captured from inside an Uber vehicle, was only obtained by the FBI 47 days after she disappeared. Nearly 7 weeks passed before investigators acquired what may be the final moving image of an 84-year-old woman before she was taken from her home in the middle of the night. No explanation has been offered for the delay. Every thread in this case, the DNA, the ransom notes, the reconnaissance dates, the neighborhood canvassing, leads somewhere, but none of them have led to Nancy. And none of them have led to a name. The contradictions pile up, the J-tweet multiply, and the silence from those who know the most grows louder with each passing week. But there is something investigators have been quietly assembling. A pattern built not from any single piece of evidence, but from the connections between them. Connections between the security gate and the January 11th visit, between the vacant house and the workers who moved through that neighborhood, between the 41 minutes of familiarity inside that home and the weeks of apparent surveillance that preceded them. When you lay those connections side by side, the shape of what happened to Nancy Guthrie begins to emerge. And it is more deliberate, more organized, and more disturbing than any single theory that has been offered so far. Every piece of evidence in this case, taken alone, can be explained away or qualified with uncertainty. The motion detection at 212 might have been an animal. The vacant house might be coincidental. The ransom notes might be a hoax. The doorbell footage might show only one person, because only one person was involved. But when you stop looking at each piece in isolation and begin tracing the connections between them, a pattern emerges that is very difficult to explain as coincidence, a pattern that suggests Nancy Guthrie was not the victim of an impulsive crime, but the target of a calculated operation that unfolded across multiple weeks, involved multiple people, and was executed by individuals who knew her neighborhood, her home, and her routines with uncomfortable precision. Start with January 11th, the date the FBI considers significant, the date former Agent Coffindaffer calls a trial run, the date a neighbor's dogs broke their usual silence with agitated barking in the middle of the night. Someone was at or near Nancy's property that evening, and the FBI's own forensic analysis of digital equipment from the home supports that conclusion. The doorbell camera images the FBI released to the public were captured on different days, according to a source who spoke with Fox News, which means the masked figure was photographed at Nancy's front door on at least 2 separate occasions. January 11th was not the abduction, it was preparation. It was someone testing the approach, studying the camera placement, learning where the blind spots were, measuring how long it took for anyone to notice unusual activity on that quiet street, and finding that the answer was no one noticed at all. Move forward to January 24th, another date the FBI has specifically asked residents about without public explanation. If January 11th was the first reconnaissance visit and January 31st was the execution, then January 24th sits almost exactly in the middle, a possible second visit, a refinement of the plan, another pass through the neighborhood to confirm that conditions had not changed and that the window of opportunity was still open. Then consider the vacant house. A property near Nancy's home was vacated in the period before her disappearance, and the FBI has been asking pointed questions about it. Retired SWAT Commander Bob Krieger described for reporters exactly how such a location could be used. As a base of operations, where individuals could observe the rhythm of daily life on the street, note when Nancy's lights went on and off, track when her family visited, learn which neighbors were home and which were away, and do all of it while appearing to have a perfectly legitimate reason to be in the area. Construction projects were active nearby. Workers came and went. Unfamiliar vehicles and unfamiliar faces were part of the scenery. Someone who wanted to watch Nancy Guthrie's home without attracting attention could not have asked for better cover than the one the neighborhood itself provided. Now layer in the construction workers. The FBI did not ask neighbors for vague descriptions of people they might have seen. They asked for specific names, the names of every contractor and laborer working on nearby houses in the days and weeks before February 1st. Brian Entin, the News Nation correspondent who has reported from the neighborhood for weeks, described this level of specificity as a notable development, an indication that investigators are no longer conducting broad canvasses, but are instead zeroing in on individuals who had repeated, unremarkable access to the area. Connect that to the security gate. If the heavy metal gate on Nancy's front door was locked, and there is no evidence it was breached, then the masked man on the porch could not have entered through it. He stood there, peering through the glass, waiting. The implication, supported by the neighbor's account and by the sheriff's department's acknowledgement that multiple suspects are not ruled out, is that someone else was already inside, someone who entered through a different point of access, and who was familiar enough with the home to navigate it in the dark. Connect that to the 41 minutes. An intruder who spends that long inside a residence is not scrambling. He is not improvising. He is operating on a timeline he has rehearsed, or at least anticipated, and he is confident that no alarm will sound, no patrol car will pass, no neighbor will hear anything that compels them to dial 911. Former Detective Ted Williams said it plainly, that the duration indicates the suspects knew the security system, knew the layout, and knew they had time. And finally, connect all of it to the question that has been hovering over this case from the very beginning. Who would go to these lengths for an 84-year-old woman living alone? The answer the evidence outlines is not a random predator and not a burglar who stumbled onto the wrong house. The evidence outlines a group of individuals who identified Nancy Guthrie as a target, surveilled her home for weeks, established a presence in her neighborhood through legitimate cover, disabled her security system with practiced precision, entered her home through a secondary access point, and extracted her within a carefully timed window while a second operative waited at the front door to assist. If that reconstruction is accurate, or even partially accurate, then the scope of this crime extends far beyond what a single doorbell camera image could ever convey. This was not an event, it was a campaign. Share this video, because Sheriff Nanos has said it clearly. Do not think for a minute that because it happened to the Guthrie family, you are safe. If the people who did this are still out there, and they are, The community needs to know what this case actually looks like when you pull the layers back. The evidence paints that picture, but the picture is not finished. The canvas is still wet. Because the FBI has not made a single arrest, the DNA is still being processed in a laboratory, and the name of the person behind that ski mask has not been spoken out loud by anyone with the authority to say it. As of today, the investigation into Nancy Guthrie's disappearance is in its 8th week. There is no identified suspect. There is no confirmed motive. There is no arrest, and Nancy has not been found, alive or otherwise. The Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI continue to operate a joint command center. Investigators are working the case, according to Sheriff Nanos, under the presumption that Nancy is still alive, though the practical reality of her survival grows more difficult to reconcile with each passing day. She is 84 years old. She depends on daily medication that was left sitting in her home the night she was taken. Her pacemaker has not transmitted a signal in 53 days. Her family's language has shifted in ways that are subtle but unmistakable. In their most recent statement, her children wrote that they want to celebrate her beautiful and courageous life, but cannot do that until she is brought to a final place of rest. Those are the words of a family that is still hoping but has begun to grieve. Savannah Guthrie visited her colleagues at Studio 1A in New York on March 5th, the first time she had returned since her mother disappeared. She told them she has every intention of coming back to the show, but admitted she does not know how. "I do not know how to come back," she said, "but I do not know how not to." She has continued to post appeals on social media, at one point specifying that the family's $1 million reward can be paid in cash to protect the anonymity of anyone who comes forward. That detail matters, because it signals that the family believes the person with the critical information may be afraid to come forward, afraid of being identified, afraid of retaliation, afraid of involvement. The reward now totals more than $1.1 million when combined with the FBI's $100,000 and the local Crime Stoppers' contribution. It is a staggering sum for a single missing person case, and the fact that it has not yet produced a breakthrough tells its own story about the nature of this crime and the fear that surrounds it. Behind the scenes, the case is reportedly anything but cold. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer maintains that investigators are overwhelmed with leads, describing them as drinking from a fire hose. The DNA evidence, though mixed and challenging, remains workable in the sheriff's assessment, and the laboratories processing it are using advanced genealogical techniques that have solved cases once considered impossible. Those results could arrive in weeks, they could arrive in months, but when they arrive, they will either confirm or dismantle the theory that someone whose genetic material does not belong in Nancy's home was inside it on the night she vanished. There are still pieces missing. The significance of January 24th has not been explained. The full content of the Uber video captured before Nancy's disappearance has not been disclosed. The motive that Sheriff Nanos claims investigators have identified has not been shared with the public. And the identity of the person standing on Nancy Guthrie's porch in the middle of the night, the person the internet has come to call Porch Guy, remains a void at the center of the case. A silhouette in a ski mask that the entire investigative apparatus of the Pima County Sheriff's Department and the Federal Bureau of Investigation has not yet been able to fill with a name. Nancy Guthrie is out there somewhere, or the answer to what happened to her is out there somewhere, held by someone in the Tucson community who may not yet realize that the detail they remember, the vehicle they saw, the conversation they overheard, the worker they noticed in a place that did not feel quite right, could be the piece that completes this puzzle. The FBI believes that. The family believes that. The question is whether that person, whoever they are, has recognized yet what they know. Nancy Guthrie's security gate was built to keep people out, and by every indication, it did exactly what it was designed to do. No one broke through it. No one forced it open. The gate held. The failure was not in the gate itself, but in the assumption that securing one entrance meant securing the home. What this case teaches anyone living alone, and particularly anyone elderly living alone, is that a single point of fortification creates a single point of focus, and criminals who have done their homework will simply go around it. The masked figure did not fight the gate. He waited beside it while someone else found another way in. Home security systems that rely on one visible camera at the front door share a similar vulnerability. Nancy's Nest doorbell camera was mounted in an obvious location, and the suspect neutralized it in seconds with a handful of vegetation and a gloved hand. A camera that can be reached, covered, or disconnected at the device itself, is a camera that provides the illusion of security rather than the substance of it. Backup cameras positioned at secondary angles and heights. Cloud-based recording systems that continue to store footage even when the physical device is tampered with. And alert systems that notify multiple family members the instant a feed goes dark are not luxuries. In a case like this one, any of those measures could have produced footage of the moments that matter most, the moments the current investigation can only guess at. But the detail in this case that may haunt families more than any other is the gap between when Nancy was taken and when anyone realized she was gone. Her pacemaker stopped transmitting at 2:28 in the morning. Her family was not contacted until nearly 10 hours later, when a friend noticed she had not appeared for her Sunday church live stream. 10 hours in which no alert was triggered, no system flagged the disconnection, no one checked. For elderly individuals living alone, particularly those with medical devices that transmit data continuously, a daily check-in protocol is not an inconvenience. It is a lifeline. A simple agreement, a text message each morning, a phone call at a set time, an app that sends an alert if the expected response does not come, could have compressed those 10 hours into minutes. It would not have prevented what happened inside that house, but it could have changed everything that happened after. And finally, what January 11th should teach every community is that suspicious activity often looks ordinary in the moment and only becomes alarming in hindsight. A neighbor's dogs barking in the night, an unfamiliar figure near a property, a car parked where it does not usually park. These details feel insignificant when they happen, and they become critical only after something terrible follows. The FBI is asking the people of Tucson to go back through their memories, their camera footage, their text messages, and look again at the days before Nancy vanished, because the reconnaissance that may have preceded this crime did not look like a crime at the time. It looked like nothing at all, and that is precisely what made it effective. The lessons are not complicated, but they require the one thing that is hardest to sustain: attention, the kind that does not wait for something terrible to justify it. 53 days ago, in the early hours of a Saturday morning, a camera went dark at 1:47, motion stirred at 2:12, and a heartbeat monitor fell silent at 2:28. Somewhere inside those 41 minutes, inside the 14-minute window, the FBI has circled in red. Nancy Guthrie was taken from the home she had lived in for more than 50 years. She has not been seen since. The FBI is still in that neighborhood. They are asking about a vacant house. They are collecting names of workers who moved through those streets in the weeks before everything went wrong. They are analyzing DNA that does not belong to anyone who should have been inside that home. And they are piecing together what happened on a quiet evening 20 days before the abduction. An evening that no one thought to question until it was far too late. Cold Case Files USA will cover every new development in this case. When the DNA results come back, when the FBI releases new information, when an arrest is made, you will hear it here. If you are in the Tucson area, or if you know someone who is, share this video. Not because it will go viral, but because Sheriff Nanos is right. Someone in that community knows something. Maybe it is a face they saw near that vacant house. Maybe it is a conversation they overheard at a job site. Maybe it is a detail so small they have not yet understood its weight. The family has asked, and so has the FBI. Call 1-800-CALL-FBI. You can remain anonymous. The reward is over $1 million, payable in cash. Day 53. Nancy Guthrie has not been found. The cameras are gone. The FBI is still here. And so is the question: who was already inside her house?